Hello and welcome. You're listening to episode number 1 of Fablebreakers.
Today, our guest is TinyMintyWolf, an artist who's done a great job connecting with her audience while balancing her creative and professional life. Minty is going to be giving us some insight into how she's managed to achieve that connection without sacrificing her sanity.
My name is Jake Romano,
And I'm Carly Racklin.
and we're here to take the myth out of making something meaningful. All right, welcome everyone to episode number 1. We're so excited to have our guest, Minty, our first guest. What an honor.
Yeah.
You don't know, I was kind of freaking out last night. I was getting all this prep work ready. I was like, she has no idea what she's getting into. So I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for being on the interview with us.
Yeah, it's really exciting to be here and to get to talk with you guys. I've been looking forward to it.
We have two. For those of you who have just started listening, this podcast will be breaking down some of those myths and fables that creative people go through and have to put up with on a daily basis. Sometimes there are some truth to these fables, and Minty is going to be talking about the fables that we put up with in context to her own artistic journey and some of the things that she's created. So, Minty, why don't you start by giving us a little bit about yourself and for the viewers who don't know about you. It says here in your bio that you've been an artist pretty much your whole life. Is that from the cradle? Have you been drawing?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, pretty much as long as I can remember, ever since I was really young, I've always just been either drawing or coloring. Uh, when I was in preschool, that was the only thing I ever wanted to do. And then when I was at home, I would just make these little storybooks that I came up with myself. They were terrible, but
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I think everyone at some point had those little coloring books that their little character, and they would I did the same
yeah,
thing. I think
Oh
everyone
my
had that
gosh.
moment, and they were so bad. They were always awful.
I still have my middle school, elementary school comics that I used to draw stuffed in a
oh, me
box
too.
somewhere.
Yeah.
What was your first original character's name, Minty?
Oh,
Oh my
oh
If you
my
can
gosh.
remember, what was your what was your doodles? What was that like?
Well, the first thing that I can remember coming up with that I actually put effort into creating was these princess characters, and they were all different elements. This is the lava princess, this is the water princess, and you know, um, I don't even remember half their names, but they were all pretty silly. Um, that's kind of probably the earliest thing that I can remember coming up with that was an original character that had a design and a name and a backstory.
Yeah, yeah. Most of your characters that you draw now are from TV shows, pop culture. I know you do have your own original characters that you still do draw, and they're all
I
fantastic. But
do.
yeah,
Yeah, um I have some original characters for this game project that I'm developing, and then some other potential novel ideas that I may do down the road.
Carly's so happy
But
when she you,
That's
her
that's
face lit
exciting.
up when you said novel.
I know.
So, I mean, it's so interesting to see your spin on these characters, and I think that you probably draw a lot of strong inspiration from them. And I think that's something. I think that's awesome. So many people are scared to, everyone wants to do their own original characters and their own original, artwork or whatever. But I think it's so cool that you're happy to draw inspiration from them, and I think that really adds to your own characters. I see a lot of those things that you're drawing from pop culture in your characters, and I just love them. They're all so bright and colorful, and I don't know, they
Thank
all just
you.
look so happy. It's so cool. I love everything that you do. And I see here that you actually, as you've been getting more into your art, it says you left your retail job to focus more on your art career, and that actually kind of plays a little bit into our theme for Fable Breakers for today, because I think that's a really big leap for someone to take. And you're young, like, you'd think that most people, they've been designing for 30 years, they're ready to go freelance. But to kind of push that aside and to do your own thing, I think that's really brave of you, and it's really admirable. And I want to hear more about that. Like, what was kind of your thought process behind that? What was the decision like for you?
Wow. Yeah, it was definitely like a big turning point for me, because I had been working the retail job and kind of doing art on the side, and it just got to the point where I wasn't able to do both at the same time, because like for the art conventions that I'm attending, uh, there was so much time that I was trying to go into to get prepared for that, and then having to ask time off of my retail job to even attend these. And there was like other opportunities for art that I had to just pass on because it was like, well, no, I got to go to work. Um, and so I had been thinking about trying to just do the art, and I knew that financially it didn't quite make sense at the time, but I was kind of thinking more like in the long run, because it's like like I don't want to do retail forever. I want to do art eventually for a career. So, putting more effort into the retail job just didn't really make sense to me, because my art was kind of suffering as a result because I just didn't have the time for it.
Yeah, and that's never like a good thing when you have two interests. And I had a little bit of the same thing because I did work at a retail job at one point, and it was either graphic design or retail, and the two things kind of were. And I never really like had that as big a decision as you did, because I had the decision made up for me actually at one point. But that's that's a little scary at some point. But I think was there something nice about kind of controlling your own destiny, I guess, is one way to put it. Like you're doing what you want. I think you're doing more of what you want. Is there is that like one of your goals, like to just do whatever you want, like as far as your artwork?
To an extent, I like being self-employed because I can kind of make my own decisions. But I mean, a lot of prayer went into the decision, so I felt like on the one hand, I was making the decision for myself, but on the other hand, I was also kind of trusting that this decision was going to move me towards, a destiny or a future that is maybe out of my control, but is ultimately what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's awesome to hear that you prayed about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what you said about quitting your job then and being your own boss, that takes a lot of self-discipline. So could you tell us a little bit about that, how you've been able to work for yourself and set deadlines for yourself, and just what's that like as an artist who wants to support themselves and kind of doing everything on their own?
Well, first of all, I'll say that I don't consider myself a very disciplined person yet. In some ways, I am. The hard thing with doing art as a job is that because art has been like a hobby for so long, I always thought of it in my brain as like, oh, well, this is like a fun, relaxing activity. But then I'd realize like, whoa, I've been drawing for like 6 hours straight and I didn't take a break, So I had to kind of retrain myself into thinking, I'm going to sit down and focus on this, and it's going to be, my block of work time, and then, not just thinking of it as a hobby, made it more like I actually have to get up and do this for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, that's tough, and I think that's something probably we've all, I think creative people who want to do creative stuff for a living, like it has to be a moment where like it jumps from being something therapeutic to something being, that's a little more scheduled, and that's kind of like a weird thing because, it used to be therapy and now it's, your job, so.
Yeah, but I think there's kind of an interesting intersection for those things too. This idea that like, we talked about maintaining your sanity while doing art, but all these things kind of did start as hobbies for us. So they started as things that we did for fun or because they made us feel good. And they still do that because they're our passions, but then we have to push ourselves harder to actually work. And that's another fable that people kind of believe, that creative things like drawing and writing are not actually hard work.
Yeah, that's my
Exactly.
favorite.
Yeah. People have said that to me before, and it's like a lot of the commissions that I have to do for people, it's like that is the last thing in the world that I want to be doing right now. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still better than being a cashier for me, but sometimes the drawing is just not pleasant at all, and it's just hard.
Yeah, I felt that too, and I get that. But have you experienced more and more of that kind of that fable that Carly was talking about? And that Carly knows that's my like pet peeve when people say, oh, it's so easy for you or whatever. Are you getting that more and more kind of now that you've made this decision to jump over into like a full-time, kind of art thing for yourself?
Yeah, sometimes, like what you said, with people just thinking that it's fun and it's not actually work, I kind of have to keep reiterating to people that it's a skill, just like any other thing that you train or study for or practice. Like I didn't, 10 years ago when I was just doodling, in my middle school sketchbooks or whatever, I did not have the same skill that I do now because I was practicing every day. I was practicing when I didn't want to practice. I was practicing things that were frustrating. And I think people don't realize that just because it's a creative thing, it's not, just fun.
Yeah. There's so much self-war that happens as an artist. And it sounds so dramatic, but like that like little war is kind of what it's kind of like the bane of my existence, and I think the bane of creative people's existence. But it's also what keeps us going. But it's so much work. Oh my gosh, it's so much work to keep going sometimes. And I think I know writers experience that as well, and I'm sure Carly can kind of talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, because with writing and art, both of those things, they can kind of involve more of your mind than your body in some way. Like with art, you are, doing brush strokes or drawing with a tablet pen, like there's movement and activity. But with writing, a lot of it is just you sitting at a desk and staring at a document, but things are going on in your head. And so like that, the activity that comes with creative things is more emotional and mental. And just because it might not be as visible as other things, people tend to think it's not really happening.
Yeah, with writing, there's either words or there's not words. Do you have anything to say about kind of like the difference between talent and skill? I think people do get them confused. I know, and maybe art takes a little bit of both. But what do you have to say about that? And kind of because I get that a lot too. It's like oh, you're so talented, and I think that kind of insinuates like oh my fairy godmother blessed me with this gift, and now here I am. I don't think it works like that.
You didn't have to do anything.
Yeah. I think, like you said, I think it's kind of a balance of talent and skill. And I've heard some people say, I can't remember exactly how it was worded, but something about how some artists maybe do have a talent for a specific area, but they still have to develop an overall skill.
Yeah.
Like I do have a friend, she is just like naturally really good at anatomy. Like she doesn't draw very often either, but she'll just draw something and it looks very accurate to real life. But because she doesn't practice other things, like if she were to do digital art, it would not maybe look the same because she hasn't practiced that. So I think, and in addition to talent, it's also passion. I think some people just naturally are born or develop this passion. And if you have the passion, then you're going to be motivated to practice that skill. So I think the talent, the passion, the skill, it's all kind of connected and it all just kind of comes together that way.
I think talent is kind of like or skill rather, talent and skill are kind of an outpouring of something else, not necessarily creativeness. I mean, like things like, drawing anatomy well, I think come back to something like attentiveness. How much attention are you paying to not just, how the human body in general, but like to life. I think artists, just have opened their eyes a little bit more, or they've had their eyes open in some way to see the world in a different way. So I think that reflects that it's not just this magic like thing. It's actually something kind of almost physical. Like they're more attentive to what's going on around them.
Yeah, and Minty, what you said earlier about passions, I think that's an important topic to dwell on. This idea that like you become in tune with yourself, and there's a moment when you kind of understand that this is more than a hobby. So could you talk a little bit about that? Like when you realized that art was your passion or your quote unquote destiny, the thing that you, yeah.
Actually, I feel like it's something that I've really just always known. Like, if you look back at my really old school assignments from when I was like 5 years old or whatever, they have the little thing that says, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I always just wrote artist. Like, it was just, yeah, I'm going to do art always. And and that changed, like, specifically as I would grow older, like what that would look like. Sometimes I would be like, well, maybe I want to do this kind of art when I grow up. Maybe I want to focus on this kind of art. And just as I'm discovering more about the art world and what options there are, you start to find a little bit more of what suits your strengths specifically.
So how was that for you? How did you find your area of focus?
And have you found your area of focus?
Yeah, that's a good question. In some ways, I feel like I still have not found it, but I'm okay with that because I don't really necessarily feel like I have to have this one thing that I do and then that's it for the rest of my life. You know, I've dabbled in a little bit of a lot of things. Like when I was younger, first I wanted to do comics. So I kind of did comics for fun, and then I realized maybe I don't want to do this, and then I wanted to be an animator, and then that didn't really seem like the right fit for me either. So I'm kind of just, right now, I feel like the illustration is my main point of focus, like just kind of creating art pieces, whether that's fan art or like original pieces. I'd like to do more original pieces too. And then trying to incorporate the art into storytelling through character design, and then this game project that I'm working on. And then if I eventually do novels, I think that art would somehow be a part of that, whether I'm doing illustrations for them or, you know, comic something, who knows.
Do you consider yourself like a storyteller? Because you're saying like the ultimate thing, or the end of your career or whatever, you know, like the ultimate thing that you could do is, you know, writing novels or creating novels. Do you consider yourself like a storyteller or a writer?
Yes, it's hard because I have not been practicing it as much recently because so much of the work side of my art is focused on like more of the fan art side, like doing commissions for people, creating art for these like comic conventions. Eventually, you know, down the road, like I would like to be supporting myself through an original project of some kind. I feel like I'm stronger in the art area than the writing area, but there might be a time where I want to kind of set that aside and focus more on the writing side and develop that skill a little bit more.
Yeah. And that's just something, and that is something that you can develop. Like, I don't think that, you know, people put writers and artists in boxes, but like, I think Carly's a good example because she does do art and writing, and I don't really consider myself a writer, and I think it's so cool. Just like you can like learn how to do anatomy or character design or, you know, landscape design, you really can branch out with different types of things, and I don't think that it's okay to put people in, you know, one box or the other. So yeah. I hope that works out for you.
Hopefully.
Yeah. And
I hope so too.
I think that like drawing, like illustration, intersects with storytelling and writing in ways that people don't always realize. Like if you're drawing an original character, or even if you're drawing fan art, like when a character doesn't exist in a vacuum, it exists in some kind of narrative, some kind of story, no matter what. And when to render that character accurately, you always have to kind of consider the story that they're part of.
Right.
The same goes for a setting. If you're doing a landscape, you have to think about, you know, the mood of this place and what does it make people feel, and that all is part of storytelling as well.
I think the most successful world building, I don't want to say storytelling necessarily, but I think world building as I've experienced it, like the best type of world building is when there's a fleshed out story. Even if it's a small story, like the world is, I think, big enough to hold the weight of the story. And it doesn't mean it's, you know, flowery details or anything, but I think there is something to to having meat on a story like that. Yeah, so I kind of want to get to our fable for you, Minty, which we've kind of been over a little bit, but just in talking about doing what you love for a living, if someone were to come to you, maybe a young artist, and say something like they had a similar experience, growing up as you, always been drawing. Maybe they want to start an art career, and I think families are usually the culprit, in discouraging artists, where they'll say something like, you can't, there's no money in that direction, or they'll throw around the term starving artist. And I want to get your take on that. I'm sure, and I know you've heard that, but what would you tell somebody who's kind of going through that? Am I going to quit my retail job, to go to start doing this for real? What would you tell someone?
Well, first, when people say those things to you, like the starving artist fable, you have to understand that it is not always because your family members don't believe in you or they think that you're not good enough. A lot of times it comes from a place of genuine concern because they want to see you succeed. They want to see you financially stable, like every parent does, I would assume. But so you have to kind of be able to recognize that and separate that, and not necessarily take it to heart that, like, oh, well, I'm going to fail because my family thinks that I'm going to fail, because that's not always what it's about.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to have a balance of being able to listen to advice from people who are older and wiser, but also realizing that not everyone is going to understand what it is that you're wanting to do, whether that's because of just a generational difference or personality difference. Like, sometimes people who are very math or science oriented, they just don't always make the connection for, like, why, because their brains just aren't wired the same, like, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So they're maybe not going to understand the whole creative world the way that you do, because you're the one who's been, like, interacting with it. So you kind of just have to let that discouragement just roll off you and keep doing what you're doing, and just know how to practice art. Like, if you want to make a career out of it, you have to treat it like a job or a field of study. You can't just be like, oh, this is like a fun hobby that I do in my spare time, because you're not going to get the same payoff if that's how you're approaching art.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, talking about art as a field of study and a job, kind of lurking in the background of these conversations is the notion that art is important, that, you're putting effort towards something that is meaningful and that has real world possibilities. It holds weight in the world. So could you tell us about that? Like, how has art helped you? What does it mean to you? Why is it so important?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
I think helping people understand that art is important is something that we should be encouraging more people towards, because these industries like Marvel Comics, they would not be so successful financially if they weren't important to people. Obviously, that's left like a huge cultural impact. And so art is important to me from like a storytelling perspective, because I really resonate with like the idea of fictional characters and these stories that they're experiencing. You develop these emotional connections, and I feel like it really helps you appreciate the complexities of real people in the real world.
Yeah.
Because you start to understand.
Without all the baggage, right?
Yeah.
they don't talk back.
Exactly. And I think being an artist, like, it helps me I observe the world. Like, I pay more attention to things in like nature and people. And I think you really start to realize like how complex and detailed those things are. And so just developing an appreciation for these things, like however you do that, like art can really help us to experience that.
Yeah, like that's always what it's been like for me, this idea that art and fictional characters especially, like, they teach us things about ourselves and other people and how we interact with the world, and we can learn things from them and learn how to, I don't know, do things differently in the world, especially with like comics, like you were talking about. We get to see these super powerful people, fighting crime and doing good, and it inspires people to go out and be good people and to care for other people. And, stories in that way, they have that power. They teach us about being human and about caring for our world and for all the people around us.
Yeah, and I don't think that's as obvious as we think it is. I think it really is a lot more, seeing those characters do, like, obviously we can't be superheroes and jump off buildings and things, but I think it's so much more subliminal than that, and it's a lot more powerful. Because you look at someone like Minty, who had to make that kind of big decision, and I do think that, that kind of almost mirrors some of these big feats that superheroes are doing. Like, that's so cool. I think it makes people braver when you have like a good story and you have intricate characters. I think it really does affect people, and I think that's a worthy cause. I think that makes art more important. It makes it that much more necessary.
That's so funny. That's like what you were saying before about little wars going on.
Yeah.
Like, a writer is always having a war in their head.
Yeah.
And
so
who says artists aren't superheroes? If we do all these crazy things that influence the world, maybe artists are the true superheroes.
Wow, that sounds awesome to me.
Yeah, right?
I love my job title to be superhero.
There you go.
Yeah.
Put it, art superhero. Yeah, you of all people could probably pull that off too. Especially with all your superhero art. I just love it. It's so fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
We have a couple questions here for you. I want to know more about kind of like what you draw. I guess something I always like to ask people is how they develop their style. Everyone starts off with the crayons and markers, and but like how did you get to that place? What were some of your biggest influences that maybe aesthetically kind of brought you to where you are now?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that you said that I have a specific style, because I have a hard time like really knowing that from my own perspective, because it's like just what I make. So I don't really feel like I have the same outlook on my own art. But my style has really evolved a lot over the years. Like, probably the earliest thing I can remember was like I would copy from the covers of like Disney VHS tapes and that kind of thing. So Disney was like an influence for a while. And then like when I got into middle school, of course, like that's when I discovered anime, and then that like
Yep.
yeah, that was like a big thing for like quite a few years. I think still there's like a little bit of the anime influence, or people have said that, like, oh, your art is like a blend of anime and cartoons, which like I'm okay with that. Like, there's still some aspects of anime that I do like, but I feel like I've significantly moved away from that more recently.
I like being tossed in there with anime.
People still say like, oh, you do anime, and I'm like, well, not really, but like I just remember that like people just kind of come up with these words or labels for things because they're not familiar with the same like art world the way we might be. But yeah, I'm right now I'm kind of more influenced by like American cartoons and like comic artists online. There's like way too many to list. Actually, my very close friend Chelsea Crane, she's been an influence on my art for like a really long time. Like, she is the one who kind of like introduced me to anime, and then like for so long she was like my model for how I wanted my art to look. And I mean, we still have pretty different styles now, but I think we still do influence each other in some ways, because she's the one who's working on this game project with me, and so I think our styles kind of complement each other in some ways, and when we collaborate we kind of bring out the best in each other.
Oh, I haven't seen any of your collaborations. Have you done collaborations with her that you've posted before?
I haven't, not that I've posted, because all of it's kind of like top secret game development.
Okay, all right.
It just kind of meshed together that way, not planned. Like, she would draw something and then ink it, and then I would color it, and then she'd be like, well, I like the way your coloring style looks with the art, the lines that I'm doing, or vice versa. So I think we just kind of, because we're so close, like we're kind of in sync creatively, which is really fun. I love that.
And some people get like that with, artists from the past. They'll kind of grab onto an artist and they'll study their life or whatever. So it's kind of cool that you have someone who's like alive that you can actually like kind of feedback on and go back and forth with. That's really neat. I mean, I think that'll probably help you grow even more. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I always like to hear about what makes something beautiful to you. What do you think? Because everyone has a different idea of what beauty is. I know some of my friends get so picky about like modern art and like what it has to say, and that's always the go-to for like this is ugly, it has no worth. But what makes something like not just visually attractive, but I think what makes something beautiful to you, and how do you try to incorporate that into your own work?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying about everybody has a different idea of beauty. And I actually love to look at the differences in that because it really comes out in people's art. And I feel like it says a lot about people's personality too. Like this person really likes earth tones, or this person really likes to use like more surreal imagery. And it just says a lot about individuality, each
Hmm.
person. Um, I would say for me, like the biggest thing I notice is color. Like I've bought prints of characters that I don't even know because I just liked the use of color so much.
Mm.
So I think that really shows in my work because coloring is like the part that I put the most effort into. Um, like pastels and neons, like that's what I'm kind of more biased towards, and that's like really obvious if you see like anything from my game project, like everything is pastel. um, but yeah, and then like as far as like what other things that I find beautiful, like when it comes to art, the character stuff like resonates with me the most, because I'm a character artist, and so I tend to notice things like expression and costume design, and then like when I'm watching like a cartoon or something or a movie, like that's what I lock onto first is
Mm.
examining this character and what it says about who they are, and that's definitely what appeals to me the most is like color and then character design.
Hmm.
Do you have any like I don't know how to say it, like artists from the past, artists who are dead that you
Oh
admire?
man, I feel so bad. Like I can't think of like specific names. Like I feel like
Okay.
I should know some more. Um, yeah,
You're not
like
required to. I'm just
wait,
I don't know if there was one that in particular maybe that draw
not
from
any that
or
I can think of offhand. It's kind of more like current artists that
Mhm.
I look at. I'd like to look at some more art from the past, but not not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I think that there's almost a renaissance of maybe especially in the past like 10 years of like artists who are have such a strong style that they really do I think they affect people in droves. I think of someone like Loish. I don't know if you're familiar with her work.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but like I think she's a prime example of someone who really Glenn Keane is another one. Like these
Yeah.
are people who are like really influencing the way that people look at art, and their style is so strong. They've honed it like so incredibly that they really are affecting I think like masses of people. Everyone's heard of Loish. She's fantastic, but
Yeah.
so like I don't it's not necessary to know people in the past, but there are obviously there are those people who now who are making these incredible steps towards something beautiful. And I always bring up Loish and Glenn Clean. They're like they're my two favorites, but
Yeah, yeah, I can totally see why.
yeah, they're pretty fantastic. And talking about your RPG, is there anything you can kind of like give us, get us like pumped about it
Yeah.
at least?
Yeah, well, if anyone has seen, like, I've uploaded quite a bit of character art in the past
Okay.
for, like, the main characters who appear in the game. Probably, like, the main one being Rizzy. Like, she's got the pink ponytail,
Okay.
and
Yep.
yeah, so she's, like, the protagonist. The genre is, like, science fiction, but I went with more of, like, not childish, like, whimsical, bright, colorful. Like, it's not, like, a dark, serious science
Mm.
fiction at all. Like, it's more playful, more goofy in some ways, but it has a lot of heart. Um, and it's like an RPG maker based game. So if you played any games like
Mm-hmm.
Off or Ib, it's the same kind of
Carly has.
format as those. Oh yeah,
I love both of those
yeah,
games.
yeah, I love those. Yeah, so it'll be kind of that same format, like the pixel art, and I don't want to say like too much about like the
Okay.
story details because
Hmm.
there's like a little bit of a mystery to it, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun working on that.
Are you working with a team, or is it just you and your friend, like you were that you mentioned before? How's
Yeah,
that working out?
the two of us are the team. Like
You're
I
it.
we're the team. I do most of the art stuff and of course like the whole story and everything. She does a lot more of the programming side of it, like actually scripting events and all this like coding stuff that's like I don't even know. So she
Hmm.
does like more technical side of it because she has a bit more of an eye for game design. So she'll come up with the ideas for like, oh, well, we should do this, and like, the level would be like more fun for the player if we did this. And so it's been so awesome having like the project would not exist as a game if not for her. And then actually my brother is the one who's doing an original soundtrack for the game as of now.
Really, that's fantastic.
Wow.
Yeah, he's given me like a few samples of what he came up with so far, because I sent him a lot of inspiration for like what I want the sound to be like, kind of like 80s synth pop, electronic, and it sounds so awesome so far. I'm like really excited to be able to share that when the time comes.
Yeah, that's so neat that you have other people that that are close to you that you can work with. You hear so many horror stories, especially about games that flop. These bigger AAA games, and there's so many moving parts to it, and no one's getting along, and they're not communicating right. So it's neat that you have a small group, and you're kind of able to have a very specific direction that you want to go in. I can't wait. When are we going to see it? When's it going to be done?
Like, we don't have a set date in mind. It kind of just depends on like, because we both have like work outside. Like, this is not our main work, the game. Like, she has teaching that she does, and then I've got all the other artwork stuff to do. So it's hard to get it on like a very consistent schedule. We're going to try and get the game out this year, like much later in the year. Yeah.
I'm so excited.
Eventually awesome. We'll like drop a trailer for it or something.
Oh, please do, yeah.
So what was that decision like to kind of start this big project? And I know you started a Patreon around the time when you announced the project, and that's a big thing. So like, what were those decisions like?
Making Digitopia a game was like kind of a weird process, because Digitopia, which is the whole story, like it was just kind of something that existed in my head for like 4 years before now. And it was just kind of like another one of those stories. Like, I didn't have a specific plan for it. I thought at one point that I was going to make it into a webcomic, and then I was like, no, I don't like doing comics. And then Chelsea was the one who initially downloaded the RPG Maker program and was like, we could make like a Digitopia related thing out of this. So we were kind of doing like just for fun on the side. Like, we didn't tell anybody. And then at some point I realized, like, why don't I just tell the whole story of Digitopia through this game? And so that was like a huge turning point for the way the story kind of took off. And I kind of had to make some like alterations to the plot so it would fit the formats of a video game a little better. And
that is so cool.
And I realized, I realized once we started moving in that direction, like, this is the perfect thing for Digitopia. Like, this is the avenue that works best for it, I think, in my opinion. And I'm really glad to have that opportunity to be able to do that now. And what you were saying about Patreon, those kind of launching those two things at the same time kind of happened hand in hand, because that was around the time when I started thinking that I was going to quit my job. So I wanted to kind of have some things in place to be working towards, so that when I quit, my family wasn't just like, well, what are you going to do now? Like, so just to like have some things in place. Like, I didn't expect it to really be successful, like right off the bat. And, I still want to kind of like work on building it a little bit more. But it does give me a sense of purpose. Like, it keeps me in check, because there's like the monthly payments. And so I want to just keep making content that's like worth people's time and worth people's money.
Yeah. And just that idea that the payments, like, it shows that it gives you kind of a direct audience of people who are interested in your work. Like, the whole concept of Patreon, I think, comes from the idea that, back in kind of the olden days, artists had patrons who paid them to make specific things. And I think that's really interesting, that idea of connecting you with people like that, people who want to see your work, and who want to support you for that. So could you talk a little bit about what that has been like connecting with an audience? And because you do have like a fairly large following on the internet, posting your art online. So how has that been for you?
Well, Patreon definitely, it feels more connected, because like when you have the followers like on Instagram or Tumblr or whatever, like not all of those people are necessarily going to interact with what you post all the time. So you can look at a number and it like looks big, but then you look at the ratio of like people who are actually engaging with your content, and it's like, not always
yeah,
even.
it's always different. Yep.
And then, so with Patreon, you kind of have a better idea of like, these are the people who are actually interested enough to kind of commit to something. They're committing to supporting you and what you want to do. So that's like a huge encouragement, even when it's like a smaller amount of people. And with the followers, like, it's like very motivating a lot of the time. But I try not to place too much importance on it because I know that I'm just going to get like obsessed with it. Like I can't worry too much about my numbers or like that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance to be had with people interacting with you and supporting you, and kind of you making the content for them, but also you making it for yourself.
Yeah, that's a pitfall I think that a lot of artists now in this digital age kind of fall into, because and it's something I've been through too. And I think a lot of people talk to themselves about this. Who am I making the art for? Is it for me? Is it for my followers? And there's always that kind of tug of war between original characters and fan art. I'm sure you've experienced that. Like, you want everyone to love your original characters, but you only get likes and reblogs on the fan art. So
exactly.
The struggle is real with that one. I know it's kind of tough, but it's all that kind of comes back to purpose and like what is your what's your purpose, and you do put out a lot of original characters and they're gorgeous, and I think people do. I love how people interact with you. I see you mostly on Tumblr, and I love when people ask stuff about your original characters, and I just I think it's so like geeky, but it's so awesome to see someone like excited about their own work like that. It's so cool, and to see other people like totally like pumped about that. Yeah, I get so stoked about that.
Thank you.
That kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, this idea that like, well, because there is a balance, I think, between you making something for yourself and you making something for patrons and like an audience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that art and storytelling they're weird in that they're kind of simultaneously generous and selfish, for like selfish for lack of a better word, where like you're doing it because it enriches your soul as a person, but also people resonate with characters and they see important things in them. So like you're producing it for yourself because it's cathartic, it just makes you feel better, but also because there are people out there who need what you're creating. And I think that's that always helps me to think about if I ever get discouraged creating something, that like this story is going to help people and it's going to touch the hearts of people out there. Not everyone, not every story is meant for every person. It's not going to make everyone happy, but there are people out there who need to hear what you're saying or need to experience whatever you're creating.
Yeah, you have these characters inside of you, and they want to eat their way out, basically. that's kind of how it is. You have this thing, and you want other people to experience it. And I think it's just a matter of letting them out. I mean, like really, everyone makes stories, but only some, or everyone has these stories floating around inside their head. And that's something I've realized more and more, is a lot of people have a lot of original characters and stories, and they want to get them out, but some people just don't have the oomph to kind of open up and make it happen. What were you going to say, Carly? Sorry.
Just like what you were saying about Minty getting messages about her original characters too. Like these are things that you've just created for yourself, but there are people out there who want to know more about them, who are already interested in these things because they resonate with them in some way.
Yeah, that's always really encouraging when it happens. And I think it's because people can see when you're passionate about your own characters. Like I look at these other artists who have their own characters, and you can just tell that they really care about them. And so if you don't care about them, your audience isn't going to either.
Absolutely.
So you kind of,
that's so important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that really shows through, like, the genuineness of it.
It's like they're children.
Exactly.
That must be why so many authors and artists call their characters their children, or why they call fictional characters their children. Like,
because they care about
has
them.
An impact. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a part of you. It's kind of an extension of me. in the same way.
Well, they're all in your head. So I mean, and I think that a lot of people, I think people see pieces of themselves in their characters. So.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that every artist, writer, creative person always has some part of themselves in everything they create, even if it's not always like a positive thing. Like you can write a villain into your story and they embody something you hate. It's just everything that a creative person makes.
It has to be. It all comes from within, right? Like it's all coming from it. Those characters, they just want to eat their way out, man. That's what it is. They got to get out. Keep thinking of like Alien when I bring it up. No. Let's not use that metaphor anymore, okay? Well, Minty, thank you so much for joining us. This has been quite an experience. I know we were having some technical issues before, but the three of us, we're so dumb, but we figured it out. we have one brain between the three of us.
We're all right brain people.
That's what it is. And together, we got three right brains. Yeah. It's been such a pleasure to meet you, and so thank you. Yeah, just really thank you for your time, and I appreciate everything you do. For those listening, you can find Minty on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, Patreon. She has a Ticktail, which I think is an online store, right, Minty?
Yes, that's right.
What do you have on there? You got prints and stuff, buttons?
It depends. Like right now, there's not a ton of stuff, but I'm going to be adding more like buttons and notebooks and like fun stationery stuff.
I've seen your notebooks. Oh, they're so cool. Yeah.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah, they're awesome. So yeah, should be sure to check her out. Her handle on most of those sites, I think, is TinyMintyWolf, right?
Oh yeah, that should be it for like everything.
For everything. Okay, fantastic. And we'll put a link in our description, and we'll definitely be posting some of her art. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today. And we hope you continue to listen to Fablebreakers as we kind of bust up more of these myths and meet some more fantastic artists. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Tumblr, we're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all at Fablebreakers. That'll do it for today's episode. I'm your host, Jake Romano.
And I'm Carly Racklin, and you've been listening to Fablebreakers.